All right. Most of us are aware, I think, probably that February is Black History Month. What you may not be aware of is how Black History Month came to be. Black History Month started in 1926 as Negro History Week. February was chosen because February coincided with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln, of course, the great emancipator as president. I think most people will agree that he ended up being assassinated for his decision to emancipate slaves and free them. And it also coincides with the birthday of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave who became a leader in the abolitionist movement to destroy slavery. Officially, Black History Month was recognized in 1976 by then President Gerald Ford. And every president since Ford has recognized February as Black History Month. And so what is Black History Month? Well, it is meant to celebrate the achievements of African Americans and highlight their contributions to the formation of our nation. Many of our history books have been neglectful in including the contributions of African Americans to the success and the formation of this country. And so Black History Month was in many ways intended to compensate for that. Knowing history and understanding history is very important. I'm a little bit troubled, and I think most of us in this gathering tonight will probably amen this statement. It concerns me that a lot of people who are younger and growing up today, and I know I'm sounding like an old man now, maybe because I am becoming one, but I'm troubled that some people approach life as though it just started when they were born. And they don't learn history and the lessons of history and how history has worked to shape where we are today. And so I think that knowing and understanding history is very important. For instance, God's people are frequently reminded in Scripture to remember. Remember is the admonition frequently in Scripture. And so we shouldn't be surprised that every year at the Feast of Passover, the Jews recall the deliverance from Egyptian captivity. Why would God give them this festival, this feast to celebrate every year? Well, one, to have an appreciation for God's goodness, to shape their identity, and for them to understand why things are the way they are now. So all of that plays into the importance of remembering and understanding history. And so that's why I've incorporated several historical events, several historical circumstances in our study, because I think they help us better understand why there is racism. Not just how we combat it, but in understanding how we maybe arrived at this place, it can help us to combat it more effectively. And I think it's even more important, especially for those of us who haven't been the objects of prejudice or racism. It is helpful for us to understand the impact on people who have been prejudged, people who have been oppressed because of the color of their skin. And so I want to begin tonight, before we get into talking about the gospel, a gospel with no barriers. That's kind of the theme of tonight's lesson. I want to look at some more of the history of racism. And I think, again, it will help us appreciate why people have responded the way they have in such strong ways to this long lasting blemish on the character of our country, and people in particular who have been racist and prejudiced. So let me start tonight with talking about the Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision was a Supreme Court decision that was handed down in 1857. Now, a little bit of background. Some of you probably know this story better than me. Some of you taught history. Dred and Harriet Scott were husband and wife as slaves. They at some point crossed paths and they married. And they were slaves who sued for their freedom. Now, their owner was part of the military. So he moved to many states during the time that he owned them as slaves, which included both slave states and free states, including the states of Illinois and Wisconsin. Now, the law at the time said that when a slave was taken into free territory, he or she automatically became free and could not be enslaved again. So it would seem very reasonable why they would have a case and why they would sue for their freedom, because indeed they had been taken to free states. And so they were petitioning the law for their freedom. So they sued to get their freedom. Well, the case went to the Supreme Court, where the Chief Justice was a man by the name of Roger Taney, who happened to be a Southerner who supported slavery. He wrote the majority opinion for a 7-2 decision that rejected freedom for Dred and Harriet Scott. Justice Taney wrote that people, and this is a summary of it. Justice Taney wrote that people of African descent were not United States citizens and could never be United States citizens. So the Scots, he concluded, had no right to sue in federal court. So they remained slaves, at least for the time being. And despite heavy criticism from many places, the decision established, at least for the time being, that blacks are not real citizens of the United States. And in doing that, it promoted white supremacy. Now, again, imagine that you're Dred and Harriet Scott. How do you think that might impact you? That the laws as they are written were not applied to their particular circumstance, and the reasoning behind it is that they were not indeed citizens. How do you think that that would impact you?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of sad because it makes you feel insignificant, like, you know, you don't count. And it's kind of the way a lot of people feel now for the same, you know, reason that their votes or what they think don't count.
You know,
Yeah. For anything. I mean, just insignificant, you know. You shouldn't have anything to say about anything.
were you about to say something, Dennis?
Can you hear him, Bill?
I can hear him, but I can't understand him, Tammy. Help me with that.
Okay, what are you saying?
They go over in the savers, and then we can
Okay.
have things.
So what he's saying is it's kind of like a double jeopardy thing, you know, go and get a group of people from Africa and bring them to the United States and then, you know, say you can't be a part of, basically, what he was saying.
Yeah, and I think it would be a very helpless feeling, I would think. For this reason, you appeal to the one thing that you thought might get you the justice you deserve, which is appeal to the system of law that might supersede the prejudice and racism that people have in their individual hearts. But you see that those who administered the law, or those who determined the meaning of the law, in this case, Judge Taney and 6 other Supreme Court justices, found a way around that. And so it would be very discouraging. It would be very it would just leave this sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Where can I get justice? How can these things be changed? If I was in the shoes of Dred and Harriet Scott. Well,
Dale?
yeah.
This is Peter.
Yeah, Peter.
Maybe we can get a little parallel feeling, some of us, how I feel about the legality of a 5-4 vote to murder infant children. You know, I have to live with that every day, and I think about it every day. I live in a country where we have a great system, and it's not perfect, but our system lets us murder children by the thousands every year, and I'm frustrated by that. And so maybe that's a little glimpse into how, you know, how frustrating it is for people of color to say, you know, for someone to walk up with a piece of paper and say, I've got a piece of paper which says you don't get this right. That can be frustrating, you know, in the same way we are frustrated by the murder that goes on every day in this country of little children.
It's a parallel to help us appreciate the limited justice and the sense of helplessness we have to do anything about it. But what's different is how it impacted the individuals involved.
That's right.
And that's the thing that I'm trying through my own listening to better understand, to put myself in the shoes of those who have experienced personally some of these things.
Dale,
Yes.
it also points to the frustratingly slow way in which change has come. I am sure in what we would call revolutionary times that the very fact that this ever came to court anywhere would have just been unthinkable. for a Black person to be represented in court, that they're actually human. At that
Mhm.
point, there were people who kind of argued that maybe you weren't.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we still are having criminal justice problems, yet it is improved, but we are no means there, and it is just so slow. I can't imagine the frustration, especially to the what we call the millennials and the younger. Everything happens so rapidly in their world, yet this happens so slowly.
Yeah. And I think, again, as we talked about previously, it happens so slowly because we're talking about trying to impact the human heart. And that's a that is not a quick turnaround usually, if at all. So from the Dred Scott decision, I want to talk about the Jim Crow laws. Now, these terms probably are familiar to you as far as you've heard the language, but you probably haven't had US history in a couple of years. And so you may not remember what all of these were about. The Jim Crow laws were written and passed largely by Southern state legislatures after the Civil War, when during the time of Reconstruction of the South, particularly around the time of 1877. These laws ensured racial segregation at the end of the 19th century. The phrase that was commonly used then and used for decades following was the phrase separate but equal. Now, what that meant in practicality, what the Jim Crow laws meant in practicality were things like this. Excuse me. Blacks had to ride in the back of the bus, and whites rode in the front of the bus. And of course, we're familiar with the case of Rosa Parks, who challenged that in Alabama. But that was kind of the expected way. It was separate but equal, as those who applied it considered it. Black men were not allowed to vote. No women at that time had the right to vote, black or white. Blacks and whites used different water fountains and different bathrooms. In some cases, there were no alternative water fountains or bathrooms for blacks. They were just white only. Under the Jim Crow laws, you could not intermarry. Blacks were prohibited from marrying whites and vice versa. Towns in places like Texas, like Vidor, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, Vidor, near Beaumont, wouldn't allow blacks into the city after dark. If you were there, I mean, there were signs that had language to it that I won't repeat for the class, but it was clear message that you better not be here if you're black after dark. Educationally, there were separate but so-called equal schools for blacks and whites, but really what happened was that the black schools got hand-me-downs or leftovers from the white schools. They were not made a priority, and that's true for the city of Lubbock, as well as for most cities in the United States during the time of the Jim Crow laws. So again, how do you think those kinds of laws, those and the way that they were played out in practicality, how do you think that would impact you if you were a Black person in this country? How would you see yourself?
Well, as I had mentioned a time earlier where you knew your place and you had to stay in your place. I grew up in this Jim Crow era where I grew up in a little town called Ennis, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
The school system was there, but they were separate but equal, but unequal, really, because we had no school buses to use. Kids had to walk clear across town in the rain, in the mud, in the snow to get to school, the Black kids, but the white kids had school buses. And I was in the band, loved music, still do. When we didn't have any uniforms, we had to wait until the white band wore out their uniforms and they got new ones and we got their hand-me-downs. Mm. And I was a little skinny boy there. I couldn't find any pants to fit me. And so a deal there was a law I mentioned Tom too before. That was called reckless eyeballing, where a Black man could not look at a white woman or a white teenage girl, or they could put him in jail for it.
Reckless eyeballing.
Yes. They could
I'm gonna
arrest
write
you
that
for
down,
that.
Charles. So how did that impact how you saw yourself, Charles?
Well, then I was helpless then. I had to wait until I was grown and join the service before I could really see what equality, quote, was. And the first deal I was, when I got there, I shared a room with the white guys. My first for me and the first for him too.
Hmm. Did it cause you to feel inferior? Did you see whites as superior to you and you felt inferior because of the color of your skin?
Growing up, yes.
Yeah.
But after I got grown, I made it a point that if I felt like I was discriminated against, I would speak up. Can I tell you another point there? I was in the service at Abilene. We was all go out to the missile sites. I helped worked on the missile sites there. Little town called, little town I talked to Doc about it the other day. Anyway, they stopped and got coffee and donuts. The Black guys had to wait in the truck. We had to wait in the truck till they bought us something back. And of course they asked us, you want something back? And it infuriated us. No, we don't want it. So I got tired of it and I went to the first sergeant and told him about it. And the first sergeant happened to be Black over our squadron. And he made a rule there that no airman could stop at that place and get coffee or donuts, anything.
Hmm. I so appreciate you sharing, Charles, because you're giving a very personal flavor to some of the things we're talking about in general, that again helped me to better understand, and I hope everybody else has a better understanding as well. Well, let's talk about then the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954. By unanimous decision, racial segregation was deemed unconstitutional. Many southern states resisted the ruling, and some of you, many of us here remember the busing and the tension that went on in our country during this time as people fought the breakdown of the case that went back to Dred Scott, of separate but equal, and how there was a recognition that it wasn't equal. My mother-in-law never graduated from high school because she went to Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas, and the school was shut down for her senior year when there came a conflict between the state and the federal government when the Arkansas, or the, excuse me, the Little Rock Nine, who were 9 black students who were brought in to integrate Little Rock Central. But many white parents would not allow their children to go to school, and there was, the state of Arkansas resisted integrating as well. So my mother-in-law was right in the midst of that, and didn't graduate from Little Rock High School or Little Rock Central High School as she would have if it hadn't been for that circumstance. And so we see again that here's another decision from history that had an impact on racism. Now, what matters more than what a Supreme Court says, or what your neighbor says, or what a school system says, is what God says. And so I want us to look at what God thinks of all this segregation and separation. And I want to begin by looking at a passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 16. If somebody would read that, I would appreciate it. 2 Corinthians 5:16.
This is Virginia. Second
Thank you.
Corinthians 5:16.
Uh-huh.
From now on, we do not regard anyone according to the flesh. Yes, though we have known Christ according to the flesh, yet we do not regard him as such from now on.
Okay. Paul is here acknowledging that he used to see people from a worldly point of view, including Jesus Christ. What do you think he meant by that? That he used to see Christ from a worldly point of view. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, with prejudice. In other words, prejudice can get you ahead, discrimination can get you ahead. And so if you look at people with that callous a viewpoint, then you're looking at a human being from a worldly point of view. Simple as that. There isn't any way to soft soap it or clean it up. It's the way it is.
And so, thank you. That's a great answer, Peter. So what I want you to see is that Paul was able to acknowledge that he had seen Jesus that way. That's why he was so passionate and zealous to destroy Christianity for a number of years. Now, again, think about that in terms of racism and prejudice that we're talking about. If you have that kind of attitude and that kind of perspective about a group of people, or about a person, if you're referring to Jesus Christ, and your attitude is, I want to destroy them, that'd be pretty hard to live in that target group, wouldn't it? And yet, that's been the mentality that many in the Black community have had to live with for much of their lives. And Charles has given testimony to the fact of how he individually has been affected by that. So what was different then? This is question number 6 if you've got a study sheet. What was different about the way Paul looked at people after becoming a follower of Christ? How do you look at people differently?
All are equal in Christ at that point.
In fact, Paul is the one who wrote Galatians chapter 3, 24 through 27, who said, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female. We're all one in Jesus Christ. And that's how people's hearts are changed, by seeing through the eyes of God, seeing how God sees, how Jesus intended for things to be. In fact, let's sing it together. And I want us to, I should probably preface it by saying we need to sing it with the words that I learned later that people like Patty Stepp and Doris Hoffman and Judy Bowe taught in the cradle roll, the song Jesus Loves the Little Children. And it's any color, dark or light, because there is no red, yellow, black or white. It's all tints of brown, as we learned last week, right? It's not, there is no black, red, yellow, black, and white. We're all different tints of brown. So let's sing it together. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. In the dark or light, day or precious in its light, Jesus loves the little children of the world. We might have been a little delayed in all the technology there, but that simple song is expressing such a deep and important truth that's easy to miss.
And it's important that these young kids are taught that, because a lot of prejudice, feelings, and attitudes are from kids who are overhearing these and maybe at around the dinner table or in adult discussions and things of that nature. And that's why a lot of kids come up saying things they really don't know what it means, but they see mom and dad doing that, so say, hey, it must be okay.
Yeah, you're right. It's racism is caught and taught.
Dale,
Yeah.
in my curriculum for all the classes I've taught my whole life, I have 4 sheets of paper. I start the first day with a piece of white Mimeo paper, then a black sheet, then a red sheet, then a yellow sheet. And I said, have you ever seen a person any of these colors? They said, well, of course not. Well, I said, okay, that's all there is to it. In this class, there are no red people, there are no brown people, there are no black people, there are no white people. We're all, as you have pointed out, we're all just on a scale of shades of melanin and the amount of sun we get. That's all. That's only difference.
That's right. And so what we're talking about is education. We need to educate people, because a lot of racism and prejudice is perpetuated because people are ignorant of what the truth is. And those who want to keep people oppressed are glad to spread those lies, but we want to be part of the solution by spreading truth. I brought, and I hope you can see it, many of you know anyway, this is a picture from before some of our more recent grandchildren had been born. Well, I guess Levi's the one who wasn't there at the time. This is Dalen. Dalen, when I introduced Dalen, as my grandson, I like to say that he looks just like his grandfather, just to get a reaction, to see what people will say. Of course, he was adopted, but he's also part of the human race. The human race, not the black race, not the white race, the one race, the human race. And so it's been a blessing to have him in our family from the standpoint of having a chance to drive that point home. Let's read the account of Acts chapter 11, because this gives, again, more of how God sees the world and how we as his people should see the world. So somebody read for us Acts chapter 11, verses 2 and 3, and then jump to verses chapter 22 and read verses 21 and 22. So somebody would do that, please.
Dale, this is Sonny.
Okay, Sandy, jump in.
All right, if I can read this. The apostles and the brothers throughout Judea heard that the Gentiles also had received the word of God. So when Peter went up to Jerusalem, those who were circumcised disputed with him, saying, "You went in and ate with the uncircumcised men."
Okay, chapter 22, 21 and 22.
I'll let Virginia read that.
All right, 21 and 22. Then he said to me, "Depart, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles." They listened to him up to this word, and then they lifted up their voices and said, "Away with such a man from the earth, for he is not fit to live." I think.
Okay, here in both of these passages, Peter in the first passage was criticized, and in chapter 22, Paul got a strong reaction. Why was Peter being criticized in chapter 11?
Because he ate with the Gentiles.
All right, he ate with the Gentiles. He ate with the uncircumcised people. And the Jews said, you don't do that. That's eating with unclean people. Well, this is the story of, as we're going to read in just a minute, of the conversion of Cornelius. And so you have people who are looking at externals and saying, you're not eligible, you're not worthy of hearing the gospel because you're uncircumcised. You have an external limitation that God doesn't accept. We'll see what is said later. Now, in chapter 22, what was Paul experiencing? People loved, because Paul was intellectual, because Paul was a powerful speaker, even though he said he wasn't in some of his writings. People loved to hear him until what? When did they start disliking what he had to say?
Oh, when he stepped on their toes.
Okay. In particular, in verse 21, in what way did he step on their toes?
He said God told him to go tell the truth to the Gentiles.
All right. Paul was God's chosen vessel to go and preach to the Gentiles. And when Paul told people that, their reaction was, you don't deserve to live. Prejudice, racism. The early church leaders dealt with that up close and personal. Now, it wasn't the same as some of the things that we deal with now, but it was still the same kind of judgment, prejudgment based on someone else's skin color. So my question is, and this is question number 9, What makes us see one another through skin-colored glasses? Why do we do that?
Some of it is still tradition, and
What do you mean by tradition, Charles?
well, as I said earlier, you know, you're taught to, from the Black perspective, to stay in your place, and therefore you will not get any trouble. And I mentioned it before, when I was a young man, then my dad told me, you go to town, you don't look a white man in the eye. You learn these things to stay in your place so you won't get in trouble.
All right. So one generation teaches the next generation, this is how you act around people of different color.
To
Okay.
protect them, yes.
In the case you're talking about, to protect, you might have that same a similar kind of conversation at a white family's table, but it might be something like, you don't hang around any of those Black people because they're dangerous, or they're less than, or they're, so that prejudice, that racism is passed on by those kinds of conversations.
That's right. It was always, you said that, yeah, from a white perspective, word was that you don't hang around or trust those niggers.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Dale?
yeah, go ahead.
Jesus even ran into this early in his ministry. Jesus was the hottest local rabbi in Galilee his first year or so in ministry, and they raved about his teaching. Late in one chapter, and I'm sorry I don't have it on the tip of my fingers, but that all ended when at the end of one of his lessons, he brought in the Samaritans. Okay, and they shut him off immediately. They'd been loving him, they'd been cheering him, they'd been going and watching, they'd been going to the synagogues and sitting there and lapping up his teaching. But as soon as he opened the door, a squeak for Samaritans, people turned on him by droves.
Do you think that reaction is still possible today?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the lesson for us to be learned is, as we go from this class and we become advocates for truth, and we become advocates for true acceptance and love, we may have the same reaction Jesus had, that Peter's talking about. So we need to be prepared for that.
I think my parents weren't racist in that they said things and they were neutral about it, but I don't think we can be neutral about it anymore. You know, it's long overdue, long overdue, but we can't just be neutral and say we're a little bit racist if we're not preaching it a little bit or a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And it's going to take a certain amount of courage to stand up to racist ideas. I have preached when it was fitting the text and circumstance. I've tried to preach pretty hard against racism and prejudice over the years. And I have actually had one encounter during my time at Greenlawn where somebody came up to me after the sermon and said, you know, why are you saying things like that from the pulpit? And I made it pretty plain to the person that any kind of racist attitudes wouldn't be something that I would abide by. And I certainly wasn't going to change the things that I'd said because they objected to it. Now, in case you're sitting there wondering what member at Greenlawn was thinking that, this was actually a visitor who confronted me about some of the things I had said in a sermon. So the mindset is still out there, and we need to be able to speak to it. Again, what makes us see one another through skin-colored glasses. Robbie, are you wanting to say something?
I was just going to interject a thought here regarding Charles McGowan and my grandchildren. Markayla's 3 kids refer to Charles as Grandpa Charles, and they do not hesitate to run and hug and kiss him. And in fact, I remember one night before an elders meeting began, for some reason, little Erin was up there and she saw Charles and she ran to him with open arms. Grandpa Charles, and gave Charles a hug right there in front of everybody. Now, of course, if Charles could blush, he would have blushed right there. But that just reinforces the fact that prejudice is learned, it is taught, and that's the only way it happens. We have experiences like this quite often. Erin, the one I was just talking about, is in school in Virginia, and her teacher is Black. And Erin was talking with her teacher and was saying that you have beautiful skin, just like my grandpa, Charles. Well, Erin, if you know her, she's blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And that teacher was taken aback, your grandpa, Charles? And she had to, next time she saw Erin's mother, which is Markayla, she asked her about that, and Markayla explained that to her, that how could a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl have a grandpa? So she was set at ease there.
Yeah.
Another case that I'm aware of, the name G.C. Brewer, was a long-time gospel preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And he preached here in Lubbock at the Broadway Church for several years. In fact, if I remember correctly, he baptized my mother. I think that's correct. But anyway, he was holding a gospel meeting in the South somewhere. And it was a custom of that church at the end of the service to leave questions to be answered, and he'd answer them the next night. Well, someone put in that box a statement, said, "Did I understand you to say," and use the N-word, "was as good as a white person?" And Brother Brewer said the next night, he said, "No, I didn't say that, but I will say it." And so he said it. And then he said the next night after the service was over, and this was at a Church of Christ, he went outside and there was a Klan dressed in their white robes and torches and had a noose. And they actually took that noose and put it around G.C. Brewer's neck and was ready to hang him, simply because he said that a Black person was as good as a white person. Now, I don't know the end of the story. I know he wasn't hanged, but why did they not hang him? And by the way, I verified this story with Perry Mason, because Perry Mason is related to G.C. Brewer. But
Grandson.
yeah, thank you. So again, racism, prejudice is taught. It is not inherent at all.
And you got to think highly of those men, Brother Brewer and Marshall Keeble. They preached up all throughout the South that way and received all kinds of threats. Where in one little town there not far from Ennis, Brother Keeble was preaching a message there about equality, and the white brethren had to get him in a vehicle and get him out of town because they would have hanged him.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, there have been some courageous people in the past, and really through this class, I'm calling us to be courageous in the ways that we're called on to be courageous as well.
But
As we're-
Dale,
Yeah, go ahead.
we
Rita?
need to see this as a Satan problem, as a heart problem, because yes, we have seen it in the South, and it can be obvious. But a town not too far from here, Dalhart, Texas, was famous for having a sign that says no white man will live after dark or something. I forget what the sign said exactly, but it was very threatening, and it made it absolutely clear they were not welcome. And so that's in our own little area, but you see throughout, whether it's Mexico, Central America, those countries, people of dark skin are very rarely in the higher leadership of their countries. Those people tend to be lighter skinned. That there is a prejudice there. There was with Portugal. There, when they went around the world, Britain with the way they treated people in India, it's the same thing, and it is not just darkness has something to do with it, and I don't know why, but there is this is a Satan problem. He knows this weakness that humans have, and he is using it.
Yes.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The reality is those go all the way back to Cain and Ham, the furtherance of this idea of racism and prejudice and seeing through skin-colored glasses. I just want to finish by mentioning a couple other things, and then we will finish the class in total next week. Sometimes people see through skin-colored glasses because of fear. If I'm told, if I'm a white kid who grows up and my parents tell me black people are dangerous, and that's what I'm told my whole life, I'm gonna grow up believing that and living according to that. And so fear sometimes is, and the fear that's built by ignorance. Sometimes there's arrogance that causes us to see through skin-colored glasses. I like the idea of being better than somebody else, and so I behave and embrace that way of thinking. I think that the KKK has that as part of its rooted mentality of having this white supremacy, that mindset. And then sometimes it just boils down to a lack of understanding between people, that there is no good, there's no good dialogue that's taken place for people to really understand the people that they have prejudices toward. They have no real reason to have it except they've been programmed to have them. And they're afraid of dialogue because they might have to change their minds. And so let's continue to be part of the change and improvement. We'll pick up where we left off tonight and join it with the material next week, and we will finish up next week and hopefully have a stronger understanding of what God's idea is. We've learned tonight the gospel is not just for one race of people or a group of people who are circumcised, or just for men, or just for the wealthy. The gospel of Jesus Christ is for every person on the planet. And so let's be involved as a church and as individuals in making sure the gospel reaches those people.